and he's got credit card debt. And he said, look, I voluntarily took on student debt, but it adds up way more than you expect. And he's got credit card debt. And
More than 44 million Americans owe $1.4 trillion in outstanding student loans, meaning they have less disposable income.
Cameron and his wife are selling their house and will use the money to pay down their loans.
Student loans have exploded into a $1.77 trillion disaster, trapping young people in debt they can't escape. Even after paying for years, some owe more than they first borrowed. Families and students are drowning, while fancy colleges keep raising prices and loan companies profit off their pain. Let us face the truth. This time bomb is ticking louder, and what comes next might shake the whole country to its core. How student loans crushed a generation. For many years, people kept telling us the same message over and over. Go to college, get a degree, and you'll open the doors to a good job and a happy life. This idea was the strongest and most popular part of the American dream, and people believed it was the best way to move up in life. To jump onto this path, millions of excited young students signed papers for student loans, often without thinking too hard about it. Sometimes, they were more careful when signing up for a new phone plan. The smiling workers in college money offices, the shiny brochures showing pictures of beautiful old buildings and promising big future paychecks, and even the government itself all seemed to be cheering people on to take out these loans. The message was, borrow money now, have a safe and successful future, pay it back later without a problem, and enjoy all the great things that come from going to college. On paper, this all sounded like a perfect plan, something that couldn't go wrong and would definitely bring great results.
It is exceptionally cruel to start these draconian collection tactics at this time.
Hold on. But wait a minute. Somewhere between the hopeful promises made when signing those loan papers and the tough reality people face after graduation, this so-called investment in your future started to turn bad, turning into a heavy and painful money problem for many people. We're not just talking about a few unlucky people or rare stories of bad luck with money. We're looking at a system that has grown into a giant $1.77 trillion problem. That's trillion with a T, leaving huge numbers of Americans, both young and old, stuck with debts they can barely pay, let alone ever fully get rid of. This is not just a small issue. It's a big, serious crisis. It's like a ticking time bomb that was slowly built over many years because of poor decisions by leaders and greedy actions by some institutions. And now that ticking sound is getting louder and harder to ignore every day. The effects of this crisis are reaching into all parts of the economy, stopping growth, delaying people's hopes and plans, and creating a deep and widespread feeling of hopelessness.
I have student loans that total just over $1 million.
You're kidding me.
And no, sir.
The ugly, rotten core of this ever-expanding problem? A significant chunk of these loans aren't the benign financial assistance they're portrayed to be. They carry the distinct stench of predatory practices. Let's peel back the layers here. Picture this. Fresh-faced 17 and 18-year-olds, many the first in their families to even consider college, are ushered into offices and presented with complex, jargon-laden loan documents. These are kids who, just months prior, might have needed a permission slip to go on a field trip, now being asked to make financial commitments that will shadow them for decades, potentially for their entire adult lives. They are aggressively sold a vision of a utopian future, often by slick recruiters from for-profit colleges whose primary objective is boosting enrollment numbers and cashing those tuition checks, rather than ensuring positive student outcomes or post-graduation success. These institutions, some of which have faced legal action for deceptive advertising and abysmal graduation rates, prey on the aspirations of the vulnerable, leaving a trail of broken dreams and insurmountable debt.
My debt has continued to build up as one of my main stressors in life. I sacrificed the dream job to come home so I could take care of my bills.
And it's not just the overtly shady operators. Even well-meaning, traditional nonprofit institutions are complicit, operating within a system where tuition costs have outpaced inflation by an astronomical margin for decades. Why has college become so expensive? A toxic brew of factors: administrative bloat, a relentless amenities arms race to attract students. Think luxury dorms and Olympic-sized pools. Decreased state funding forcing public universities to hike prices, and the easy availability of federal student loans, which some argue simply enables colleges to keep raising their sticker prices, knowing students can just borrow more. The government, in its attempt to make education accessible, inadvertently fueled an unsustainable cost inferno.
I'm paying probably $850 as my monthly payment, and that is about a little less than a third of my.
Let's be very clear about one important point. If you took out the loan and signed the paper that says you agreed to it, then yes, that debt is legally and honestly your responsibility. There's no way around that simple truth. Pretending it's not real and just hoping that some big magical loan forgiveness will suddenly appear and erase all the debt is not a smart money plan. In fact, it's a risky move that can hurt your money situation and your credit score. You borrowed the money, usually to get an education and skills that should help you make more money later on. Paying back what you borrowed is an important part of being responsible with money. That's the plain, tough truth. And trying to avoid that duty won't help you build a strong and independent future. And this is a very big but, just because you accept your personal responsibility doesn't mean you should ignore the fact that the system is often unfair and stacked against the person who borrows the money. The real problem, the one that crushes dreams and makes hardworking people feel trapped, is the huge problem of interest. This isn't just a small or fair extra charge added to cover costs or rising prices. We're talking about interest rates that are very high, along with loan rules that are so confusing and tilted against the borrower that even people who pay every month on time can end up, years later, owing more money than they first borrowed. Month after month, they make their payments, often giving up other important things they need, but they still see their debt growing larger and larger instead of getting smaller. It's like running up an escalator that's going down faster and faster, or like trying to scoop water out of a sinking boat using a tiny cup while someone keeps making new holes in the boat. For example, imagine you borrow $30,000 to get your bachelor's degree. You get a pretty good job, not a huge paycheck, but enough to start paying back the loan. You keep making payments for 10 years, and maybe you've paid $25,000 so far. But when you check your loan balance, instead of seeing that you're almost done, you find out you now owe $45,000. How can this happen? One big reason is something called interest capitalization. This means that any unpaid interest, like from times when you put payments on hold or when your payment amount was too low to cover the interest, gets added to the main loan amount. Suddenly, you're paying interest on top of interest. On top of that, there are extra fees hidden in the fine print. Things like starting fees, late fees that can be really harsh, and even collection fees if you miss payments.
The Department of Education estimates about 5 million borrowers have defaulted on student loans.
And let's not forget about the loan servicers, which are the companies hired by the government or private lenders to handle your loan. These companies don't always have the same goals as you do. Many people with student loans say they have had terrible experiences with these companies, like having their payments put in the wrong place, having their important papers go missing, being pushed into forbearance, which stops payments, but lets the interest grow much bigger, or getting confusing and mixed up information when they call for help. For these loan servicers, sometimes the easiest or most profitable choice for them is not the best choice for your long-term money health. Some government loans, like Parent Plus loans, also have shockingly high starting fees and interest rates compared to regular student loans, which can trap parents in a lot of debt as they try to help their children go to college. With the student debt crisis deepening in 2025 and solutions lost in debate, millions fought for survival against a system seemingly rigged for their failure, seeking escape from America's trillion-dollar crisis. The effects of all this student loan debt don't just hurt the people who owe money, they also spread out and hurt the whole economy. Young people who have loan payments as big as a house payment are often forced to delay or skip big life goals, like buying a home or starting a family. Home ownership among young adults is slowing down. Starting a small business, which usually helps create new jobs and bring new ideas, becomes almost impossible when someone is already buried in debt. Saving for retirement, for many, that feels like a bad joke. Spending money on everyday things, which keeps the economy going, drops as more and more of people's paychecks go toward paying off loans that never seem to shrink. There's also a huge impact on mental health. Constant worry, stress, and the feeling of being stuck with no way out, which leads to people feeling less healthy and working less effectively. What's worse, the weight of this debt often falls harder on students from minority groups and low-income families, who usually need to borrow more and may go to schools with fewer resources, making the problem of unfairness even bigger.
Has overtaken credit cards as, after mortgages, the next biggest payment that people have to face in terms of the debt that they have to pay on a monthly basis.
So, what's the escape hatch? How do we defuse this ticking behemoth? The calls for widespread blanket student loan forgiveness are loud and passionate, and the relief it would offer millions is undeniable. But it's a solution fraught with its own set of problems. Is it fair to the millions who sacrificed, worked multiple jobs, lived frugally, and successfully paid off their loans? Is it fair to those who chose more affordable community colleges or opted for trades specifically to avoid debt? What about the staggering cost to taxpayers, many of whom never went to college themselves? And would it solve the root problem of runaway college costs and predatory lending practices, or simply reset the clock for the next generation to fall into the same trap, perhaps even encouraging more reckless borrowing under the assumption of future bailouts, the classic moral hazard? Perhaps the more pragmatic, more equitable, though admittedly less headline-grabbing, solution isn't about erasing the debt wholesale, but about fundamentally restructuring the terms to make it fair and manageable. What if we seriously, and I mean seriously, considered dropping the interest rates on federal student loans to 0%? Or if that's too radical for the bean counters, capping them at a truly nominal, fixed rate, say 0.5% or 1%, just enough to cover the basic administrative costs of the program. The federal government should not be in the business of profiting off the educational aspirations of its citizens. Its role is to invest in them. This isn't a radical handout, it's about basic fairness and economic sense. It's about giving people a realistic pathway to pay back the principal they actually borrowed, plus a minimal, non-exploitative servicing fee without condemning them to a life sentence of compounding interest.
You click onto the federal student aid website, it says if you haven't made a payment in more than 360 days, you may be in default.
As we already know, the student loan situation in 2025 is full of problems, with collections starting again and many heated debates about policies. But when we look beyond the big numbers and news stories, we can see even deeper issues that affect many groups of people in different ways, making the crisis even worse for everyone. You were right to point out the serious issues with loan servicers, and this problem has only gotten worse over time. Even though people have started paying back their loans again, many borrowers are still struggling because of the companies that handle their loans. Reports from 2024 and early 2025 show that the same problems keep happening, and they are not going away anytime soon. There have been many stories of payments being sent to the wrong accounts, important papers being lost, which happens often, and borrowers being told the wrong things about their loans, repayment plans, or help programs like public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment. These mistakes can lead to huge problems, such as surprise defaults, more interest being added, and missed chances to get help with paying loans. Things became even more confusing when about 40% of borrowers were switched to different loan servicers during the repayment break, causing even more headaches and paperwork for everyone.
But the check was real, and he says he spent the 15 grand on travel and home expenses.
The Department of Education is supposed to make sure these companies do their jobs right, but many people believe the department has not done enough to protect borrowers. Groups like the Student Borrower Protection Center and the American Federation of Teachers have looked into the actions of big loan servicers like Mohila, finding problems like phone systems set up to keep borrowers from reaching real people, unfairly denying help, and overall poor management of the loans. In October 2024, the Department of Education said Mohila had made many serious mistakes. And now, early in 2025, people are asking for stronger punishments, including the idea of ending contracts with companies that keep failing. Borrowers often face very long wait times when they try to get help, which is especially hard now as many people are trying to figure out confusing repayment options or fix mistakes so they can avoid losing part of their wages or tax refunds, which are being taken again as of May 2025. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has helped keep an eye on these companies in the past, but in February 2025, the Bureau dropped several cases against financial companies, including a student loan servicer. This has worried consumer groups who now wonder if the government is still working hard to protect borrowers, even as some lawmakers push for a new law called the Student Loan Servicers Accountability Act, which would require these companies to do better. These problems are not just small annoyances, but real roadblocks that keep borrowers from handling their loans and getting the help they are supposed to have, making the system feel even more confusing and unfair. For-profit colleges are also still adding to the student loan crisis in 2025. These schools often focus on vulnerable students by using fancy ads and promises of high-paying jobs, but they often fail to give students what they need to succeed. For-profit schools enroll only about 8 to 10% of all college students, but they are responsible for about 30% of student loan defaults, which shows how often students at these schools do not get good results for the money they spend. While some of the worst schools have been shut down or taken to court, there are still many concerns. The Department of Education watches some schools more closely using a process called heightened cash monitoring, and several for-profit schools remain on that list as of late 2024 and early 2025. There are also rules like the Gainful Employment Rule, meant to make sure career programs lead to jobs that help students repay loans, but these rules have been added, removed, and changed over time, leaving a confusing system with weak accountability. Many for-profit colleges rely mostly on federal student aid money, and a rule called the 90/10ths rule, which was recently made stricter, is supposed to make sure these schools also get some money from other sources. But many critics say there are still loopholes and aggressive marketing practices that push students to take on too much debt without thinking enough about whether they will be able to pay it back. The continued flow of federal loans to schools with poor student outcomes and high default rates remains a big weakness in the system, trapping students in debt without the promised career success they hope for.
It can stay on your credit score, by the way, your credit report for 7 years if you wind up really defaulting on these loans and not doing anything about it. So
every payment a desperate prayer, every statement a soul-crushing blow. 2025 revealed their system wasn't just stealing your money, it was methodically dismantling your life. Their profit, your pain. In 2025, the problem of student loans has become even harder for people, and one of the biggest reasons is the weight of interest, which keeps growing and makes paying back loans much more difficult. It is not just that interest rates are high when the loan begins, but it is also about how interest works within the loan system, especially when it comes to something called capitalization and negative amortization, which have remained at the center of the struggle for borrowers this year. When we talk about interest capitalization, we mean that unpaid interest is added to the loan's main balance, which is called the principal. After this happens, the borrower has to pay interest, not just on the amount they first borrowed, but also on the added interest, which makes the loan even bigger over time. This often happens after people take a break from paying through deferment or forbearance, or if they leave an income-driven repayment plan or no longer qualify to pay based on their income under plans like income-based repayment. The painful result is that balances can grow bigger and bigger even when borrowers are making their regular payments, and that leaves many people feeling like they will never be able to get out from under the debt. Another painful problem is negative amortization, which happens when the monthly payment someone makes under an income-driven repayment plan is actually smaller than the interest that adds up each month. While this kind of payment plan gives people some short-term relief by keeping their monthly payment low, the unpaid interest continues to pile up. Some of the newer repayment plans have tried to cover more of this unpaid interest to help borrowers, but legal fights over plans like Save have left many people in a situation where their balances keep growing even though they are making every payment they are asked to make. This experience of paying and paying, but still owing more and more over time, is frustrating, heartbreaking, and financially damaging, creating a debt trap that can feel impossible to escape. Even though many people, from experts to lawmakers, understand how bad the problems of interest capitalization and negative amortization are, broad reforms to stop or limit these practices across all loan types have been slow to arrive or have only been done in small steps. While some government actions or repayment plan rules have tried to handle parts of the problem, the basic system that lets balances grow this way is still in place for many borrowers, leaving them stuck. Besides the financial side, the student debt crisis also takes a hidden but powerful toll on people's mental health. And this part of the problem does not get talked about enough. Reports and discussions in 2024 and 2025 have continued to show how deeply student debt affects people's minds and emotions. Many borrowers feel a heavy mix of stress, anxiety, and sadness because of the constant pressure from huge debt, the fear of falling behind, the anger at loan servicers who make mistakes or give wrong advice, and the need to put off major life goals like buying a home or starting a family. A 2025 report from Fidelity Investments said that more than half of Americans have faced mental health problems because of student debt. And this stress has only been made worse by the unclear rules around forgiveness programs and the general worries about the economy. The burden of student loans also hits some groups of people harder than others. First-generation college students, for example, often come from families with less wealth and less experience with things like financial aid, so they end up borrowing more, struggling more, and feeling more stressed than other students. Even though a February 2025 report from the Lumina Foundation showed that first-generation students remain hopeful about the value of their degrees, the weight of their debt remains a big obstacle they must face. Borrowers with disabilities also face special challenges. While there is a program called Total and Permanent Disability Discharge to help these borrowers, the application process can be complicated and hard to navigate. Also, people with disabilities who live on fixed incomes may find that any student loan payment, even a small one, under an income-driven repayment plan is too much to handle. When collections resumed, including the threat of having wages or even Social Security or disability payments taken for defaulted loans, this group faced an especially sharp threat to their financial security. Borrowers living in rural areas also face challenges, even though they are sometimes left out of national reports. Research shows that student debt can make it harder for graduates from rural areas to return home, start local businesses, or put money into their communities because they are burdened by a heavy debt-to-income ratio. While most news focuses on what the federal government is doing, some states and colleges are also trying to find ways to help with the student debt problem. Certain states have started their own forgiveness programs, often aimed at people working in important fields like teaching or healthcare in communities that do not have enough workers. There are also grants and state-level borrower protections to control how loan servicers behave. For example, in May 2025, New York City started a program to help city workers sign up for federal public service, loan forgiveness, and income-driven repayment plans, hoping to help many local public servants erase their debts. While these are good steps, they are often small and cannot replace the kind of broad federal reforms that are still needed. There is also a growing idea that colleges should take on some of the financial responsibility when their students default on loans, which is called risk sharing. This idea is showing up more in policy talks, like in proposals made by House Republicans. Besides that, more people are calling on schools to be clearer about costs and outcomes, to spend more on student support services and career centers, and to focus more on keeping school affordable so that students do not need to borrow so much in the first place. Still, the long-term trend of states cutting back on funding for public colleges, as mentioned in a 2024 article from the International Higher Education Journal, has pushed more of the cost onto students and their families, which is one of the main reasons why borrowing has gone up, and it is something that schools alone cannot fully fix. The student loan crisis we are seeing in 2025 is not just the same old story, it has grown even worse. With the end of the protections that were put in place during the pandemic, along with new policy changes and the ongoing deep flaws in how loans, servicing, and school accountability are set up, the situation has become even more dangerous. Unless bigger and fairer solutions are put into action, the student debt crisis is only going to keep hurting borrowers, families, and the economy in more ways, bringing the country closer to a breaking point. Is the main problem personal responsibility, or do we need to focus more on fixing the system? Or is it really a mix of both? Right now, the system feels broken, built to take from people instead of helping them.